Bear lies on the kitchen floor, 6 feet from the man he has loved for 11 years. The man is right there, awake, breathing, watching television. Bear doesn't move closer. He hasn't moved closer in months. Nobody died. There's no funeral, no empty leash hanging by the door, no absence anyone can point to. The man is in his chair every single day, same as always, and yet something in that house is gone. Something Bear has clearly noticed, which raises a question grief researchers have only recently started taking seriously. Can an animal grieve someone who never actually left? By the end of this video, I want to tell you what happened the one evening Bear's owner fussed us for about 4 minutes so it came back, and what Bear did in those 4 minutes that his family still talks about. But first, we need a word that doesn't exist in everyday language, because what's happening to Bear doesn't fit the kind of loss we normally know how to name. In 1999, a family therapist named Pauline Boss at the University of Minnesota published a concept that reshaped how clinicians think about grief. She called it ambiguous loss. It describes a very specific kind of suffering, loss without resolution because the person is physically present but psychologically absent, or psychologically present but physically gone, a soldier missing in action, a parent with advanced dementia, someone incarcerated for decades. Boss's research found something counterintuitive. Ambiguous loss is often harder to process than ordinary grief. Not easier, precisely because there's no clear ending, no funeral, no social permission to mourn. The grieving person is left holding a loss that the rest of the world keeps insisting hasn't happened. This concept was built entirely around human psychology, but the body of research on animal attachment that we've covered before, the neural architecture a dog builds for one specific person, the caudate nucleus response, the chemical signature of a relationship, none of that requires human language to operate, which means if a dog's entire emotional world is built around the specific pattern of one person, and that pattern disappears while the person's body stays in the room, the dog may be the only other species on Earth capable of experiencing ambiguous loss exactly the way Pauline Boss described it. Here's what most people don't realize about how a dog recognizes you. It isn't one signal. It's a layered stack of them. Scent, voice pitch, gait, posture, the specific rhythm of how you move through a room, the timing of your responses to them. All of it gets bundled into a single neural representation. This is my person. In ordinary life, that whole stack moves together. Your voice ages with your body. Your habits shift gradually. The bundle stays coherent. Dementia and certain advanced illnesses do something the dog system was never built to handle. They unbundle it. The scent stays almost entirely the same. The face is unchanged. The body that the dog has slept against for a decade is sitting in the exact same chair, but the voice loses its old rhythm. Eye contact, the specific mutual gaze that, as we covered before, triggers oxytocin release in both dog and owner, drops sharply or disappears. Response timing changes. The person stops initiating affection in the particular way they always used to. Every input the dog's brain is built to read is now contradicting every other one. The body says, "This is him." Almost everything else says, "This isn't." Here's where the science gets harder to look away from. And the data on what happens next is stranger than a simple loss of interest. Veterinary behaviorists who work with families navigating cognitive decline have begun documenting a consistent pattern in companion animals living through it. Reduced approach behavior toward the affected person, increased vigilance from a distance rather than close contact. In some cases, the animal redirects affection-seeking behavior toward other family members entirely, as if quietly reallocating an attachment that no longer has anywhere to land. This is not a dog that has stopped loving someone. This is a dog whose attachment system is receiving a signal it has no category for. Not gone. Not the same. Something the architecture was simply never built to file. In human caregivers experiencing ambiguous loss, psychologists describe a specific symptom cluster, chronic, low-grade grief that never resolves into the normal stages, because the person keeps reappearing just enough to reopen the wound each time. The behavioral data in dogs tracks remarkably close to that same shape, not the sharp spike-then-recovery curve of ordinary separation distress, a flatter, longer, recurring pattern, grief with no edges, because the thing being grieved keeps almost coming back. Here's the part that resists any clean explanation. Families of people in long-term comas, advanced late-stage dementia, or extended incarceration have independently reported something almost identical across completely unrelated cases with no contact between them. The family dog or cat begins gradually treating a specific chair, side of the bed, or doorway as occupied, long after the person stopped using it the old way, sniffing it, lying near it, sometimes refusing to let anyone else sit there. This is anecdotal. It hasn't been measured in a controlled study and probably can't be ethically given what it would require. But the consistency of the pattern, reported independently across cases that share nothing except the shape of the loss, is hard to dismiss as coincidence. What seems to be happening is something almost unbearably precise. The animal isn't guarding the chair because the person might return to it. It's guarding the chair because the version of the person who used to belong in it already hasn't. The body in the next room and the person the dog is grieving are, in the most literal biological sense, no longer fully the same signal. Bear's owner, James, was a retired carpenter. For 10 years, every evening had the same shape. James in his chair, Bear's head on his knee, James's hand finding the same spot behind Bear's ear without ever looking down to find it. Dementia took that hand's memory before it took almost anything else. James stopped reaching down. Bear, after a while, stopped expecting him to. For nearly a year, Bear kept his distance, the 6 feet from the opening of this video, present, watching, not approaching. Then, on one ordinary evening, something shifted. James's daughter was describing it later. For about 4 minutes, mid-conversation, James suddenly turned, looked directly at the spot on the floor, and said Bear's name, just his name, clearly the way he used to. Bear crossed the 6 feet immediately, put his head on James's knee, and James's hand, without hesitation, without looking, found the exact spot behind Bear's ear it always used to. For 4 minutes, the old pattern was back, completely. Bear stayed pressed against him the entire time. Then the moment passed, the way it does. James's hand stilled. His eyes drifted back to the television. The voice didn't return. Bear didn't move away this time. He stayed exactly where he was, head still on James's knee, for the rest of the evening. His daughter said it was the only time in nearly a year Bear had stayed that close after the moment ended, instead of retreating back to his 6 feet. Researchers studying ambiguous loss in human caregivers describe something they call Hope's particular cruelty, the way a single good moment can make the surrounding loss harder to carry, not easier, because it proves the person is still in there somewhere. Reachable, just not reachably enough. Nobody can say for certain whether Bear experienced that cruelty the way a human caregiver does. What we can say is that for 4 minutes, every signal his brain reads as this is my person, was true again, all at once, after a year of contradiction. And whatever that felt like from the inside, Bear chose for the rest of that night to stay close to a man who might not say his name again for weeks. Grief, it turns out, was never really about absence. It was about the gap between the signal and the person, and the most quietly devastating thing about that gap is also the most hopeful, because it means the love was never the problem. The love was working exactly as it was built to. It just never got told the difference between a man and the particular pattern that used to make him recognizably fully himself. Bear is not grieving a man who is gone. He is grieving the man who is still, somehow, right there.